about to come with me to explore World of Warcraft and all its twists, turns, and timelines with the power of walking, riding, and eventually flying. Stick around and find out what's in store for us traversing the lands of Blizzard's massive RPG. I'm Camixs, and as a connoisseur of the WoW franchise since 2004, I've been scouring the lands of Azeroth's past, present, and future for quite some time. However, I've always wondered how much experience you can gain just by walking around and exploring. After all, the massive scale of the game isn't captured just by looking at a map or questing with 310% flying on, but by rather taking a step back and realizing that the world's atmosphere is so vast that there's a literal achievement section for just exploring the zones. So, in an effort to answer this question, I'm about to venture forth on the long road from Teldrassil to all parts of the world without killing a single soul, collecting a single herb, or even kissing a single toad. In an effort to ask, can you beat World of Warcraft if you only explore? In this episode, there are 21 zones to cover in the lands of Kalimdor, and I'm not about to stop until I hit all of them, starting from the top islands and eventually making my way down to the sweet chariot at the bottom. Stick around to guess how many levels I gained through this endeavor, starting with Teldrassil. Technically, this zone shouldn't be even on the list, what with the, crispy nature that it makes it near impossible to explore. But thankfully for us, Blizzard decided to allow it to remain in a starting zone until you inevitably leave the tree and get to watch it burn down by their Witchfoot poster child. One thing to note during this time was the discovery of mystery zones. For exploration purposes, I am using the achievement markers to say a zone is complete. However, some of these locations aren't marked on the list, and as such, they give extra experience on top of what is already promised. I'll do my best to explore every spot, but if this happens and I'm already done exploring a zone, I'm not going to run into every little corner hoping that there may be some experience to be gained there. As for actually exploring it, well, I mean, what did you expect? No, really, what did you expect? Because it's probably exactly what you expected. As a starting alliance zone, I'd give it a 2 out of 10 difficulty because I doubt you'd actually get into much trouble doing it. Well, unless you're a blood elf trying to float your way to Teldrassil, then yeah, I mean, expect difficulties. What are you going to do? You're in a lot of trouble. So with a quick 18 minutes into the recording, we get Teldrassil under our belt and move on to the doomed island, Azure-Mist. Ah, yes, Azure-Mist, the home of the most underused city in the entire game. I kid you not, there is never a single person in Exodar. Well, besides the eternal suffering of the NPCs who stand there perpetually, about to die at any moment when Blizzard decides they need another main city to destroy. One reason I didn't do this challenge as a Draenei is because for some reason, Blizzard made it impossible for you to leave here at level 10, at least to go to Darkshore. In fact, because of this, I had to use a flight path to leave. Yeah, good game design, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to go ahead and give Blizzard yet another reward for all of their hard work. Since this is another Alliance starting zone, you can imagine the difficulty is about the same rating as its Night Elf counterpart. Most things aren't too out of the way and you can find your bearings with relative ease, but I will give it a 2 out of 10 just because you do have to swim to one location. Unless you really hate yourself and you try to do this as a Horde member, then you'll probably find an 8 out of 10, maybe 9 out of 10, which I need to get here as the actual true challenge. Exploring it itself won't be hard, but you will have a hard time getting here as a Horde. Believe me, I wanted to try. I was able to explore the Isles in 36 minutes, or another 18 minutes after arrival from Teldrassil, and Sorry, hang on. I feel like I'm forgetting something here. Now, if Exodar is the Forgotten City, Bloodmist is the Forgotten Zone. Seriously, when was the last time you actually did Bloodmist for yourself? Yeah, I thought so. I almost forgot about it myself, but towards the end of the Azure-Mist zone, I remember its existence and decided to go exploring. This place is probably more annoying than challenging to explore. It's got these strange spots on the map that are essentially hidden from the player unless you wander into the water, and unlike Warfog on the map prior to exploring, there's no real indicator of their existence, making it to where you're either stuck looking for it or you're looking up where you're supposed to go. It's just a whole confusing thing, and as such, even though it is still an Alliance strict leveling zone, I give it a 4 out of 10 because let's be real here, this sort of hidden discovery zone kind of thing almost never happens again in any other zone as far as I'm aware of. Still, outside of that, there is a lot of swimming on the outskirts. I mean, it ain't the worst, but, it's definitely not that fun. About 55 minutes in, or 19 minutes after exploring Azure-Mist, we head on down to the Night Elf's second leveling location, Darkshore. It's crazy how much ground the elves actually lose, essentially being on the march by the Green Republic roll tide of Kalimdor's Discount Desert. Other than a slight hiccup thinking I could somehow get the Moonglade from here, it's pretty much like a snake's way to complete Darkshore's exploration. With it being exclusively Alliance territory, this really shouldn't come as a surprise. I'm going to go ahead and give Darkshore a 3 out of 10 because there's another island to swim on, but honestly it's barely off the coast and isn't really even worth talking about. So after about another 20 minutes or 1 hour and 15 minutes into recording, Darkshore's looming presence and future is left behind for a place that will change up the formula for the foreseeable future. Ashenvale is surprisingly deceivingly for how lush of an environment it turns out to be, because while you think it's mostly a land for tree-frolicking explorers like myself, the reality is it's what I'd like to call a contested zone. You know, because that's what it's called in the PvP zones. Yeah, I'm clever. But Ashenvale does mark the first location that really sets the loss of faction-flavored territories, and honestly, it doesn't get much better from here. Combat that with a bit of strange exploration patterns of having to circle around while avoiding the more dangerous horde camps, and you definitely got a difficult spot to roam via on foot. Taking that into consideration, the area still had little ways of challenges, as most areas can be explored without going too in-depth, but I'll still give it a 5 out of 10 because of maneuverability concerns. Ashenvale took me about 30 minutes to explore, or better yet, if you're actually looking for the full time, it's about 1 hour and 45 minutes of the recording time. Felwood is yet another zone that people probably forgot exists unless you actively went searching for it in its dark, tainted atmosphere. Since Cataclysm, it hasn't really seen much of the light shined upon it, and really Blizzard has seemed to straight up have given this zone a mostly neutral treatment. Like the contested zone of Ashenvale, Felwood is closer to a neutral zone as it really doesn't have a lot of the Horde Alliance conflict. Therefore, bases are easily explored from south to north. The issue actually comes from the level of mobs versus my personal level. Felwood's mob starts at level 15, and really at this point I'm still a little under that threshold. However, this issue is overcome by the fact that, well, I mean, it's a straight shot. Nothing is too complex about the layout, and if you stay pretty much on the road to Explorer, you'll be okay. As such, despite being a higher level with my bike in tow, I only give the rating about 3 out of 10 because really, you don't have to do a lot unless you actively run right into a camp of dangerous enemies. We finished Felwood at 1 hour and 58 minutes into the recording, or a whopping 13 minutes after finishing Ashenvale, the shortest time between two zones up to this point. Or at least it would be if it wasn't for Moonglade, the forgotten druidic zone that no longer holds any real value outside of being a spot for druids to teleport and do some furry fun time. What's there to say about Moonglade? Though it's technically a neutral zone, there's 4 spots to explore, and you can go in a circle and be out into the next location in no time. Obviously, because it's such a difficult spot, I'm giving it a 10 out of 10 in a difficulty rating. -9 for the circular motion. Moonglade is done at the 2 hour and 3 minute mark, or 5 minutes after completing Felwood. Yeah, really wasn't that much to be said about this one. You know what, maybe I just don't like the top half of Kalimdor, because I feel like Winter Spring is also a sleeper zone with minimal activity. Or for people who want to do Winter Veil specials and restrict themselves to Frost zones. Either or. As a neutral zone, Winter Spring did actually pose a little bit of a challenge, as along with the level 15 mobs, the layout isn't as straightforward as Felwood. The goal was to go from east to west, bend north, and then shoot south towards the canyon down below. I thought, honestly, I'd have to jump down the cavern at the bottom, but after being able to see the crisp edge and getting that just barely set up for an achievement, it wasn't necessary, thankfully. Without much horde conflict here, the only really thing to worry about is the base neutral mobs, and so difficulty here will stem to around 4 out of 10 because the challenge came from traveling the layout more than anything else. Despite the layout, however, we finished Winter Spring 2 hours and 16 minutes in, or 13 minutes after completing Moonglade. Ajara was on the next big zones to tackle, and this Crescent Rail, ironically, is not owned by elves, but by the greedy faction of the Bilgewater Cartel. Now, this zone actually posed some difficulty in both maneuvering and safety, as the reality is that this zone goes from being neutral or contested to a straight-up enemy for the next few zones. Ajara is no exception, being an all-horde zone, or at least 95% besides the very beginning of the zone within an alliance stronghold. Cover that with a somewhat gross layout of a crescent, the island in the middle, and the rocky cliffs left and right, and this zone has all the makings of an annoying and complex spot to explore completely. As such, it will be the first zone I give a 7 out of 10 difficulty in Kalimdor, because even if you're Horde, you'll still have a little bit of trouble moving around, and if you're Alliance, it's outright cruel to walk this place by foot. Horde bases every few feet and packed mobs in places that if you don't go to, you're not going to be able to explore them, so you gotta walk in as far as possible. And because of these hiccups and trying to work the strategy to get all the way around without avoiding the swimming and doing all this other stuff, Ajara has ended up completed in about 2 hours and 53 minutes in, or 37 minutes after completing Winter Spring. But surely Durotar is going to be the kingpin of Horde difficult zones. After all, the home of the desert, battle-hardened Oryx, and the impenetrable fortress of Orgrimmar, there is no way this elf is getting past the defense. So if you go to this wall, stand right here, boom, you got Orgrimmar. Yeah, despite Orgrimmar being the Orcs' starting zone, the difficulty is really just avoiding the guards at Orgrimmar's gate and venturing over, which doesn't take you long after swimming to the riverside and letting yourself die at the side gate of Orgrimmar to spawn at Razor Hill. After that, most of the zones in Durotar have a wide enough outskirts to avoid getting into the cities, allowing for you to navigate from north to south and basically do whatever you need to do. Now, the zone still has some difficulty, given it's not free if you wander too close to certain spots, but I only give Durotar a 5 out of 10, because really walking here took me almost no time at all, and I really hadn't seen a single Horde player to engage me in combat. At about 3 hours and 13 minutes, or 20 minutes after Ajara, we were on our way to the Northern Barrens. Now, I had used the secret path from Valley of Trials to get to Ratchet, so that might account for some of the time taken. But for those of you wondering, Barrens chat still doesn't exist on Alliance side. I checked. What I did, however, see was a crossroads of cut that. What I did, however, see was a crossroads of where I was going to explore next. Do we continue to go down the Southern Barrens or north towards Stone Talon? I decided to take the northern path and deviate off a bit to ensure that I could get this left side of Kalimdor done, but outside of the Kor'kron base camps, there's not really much for me to encounter here either. Even though it's a Horde exclusive zones, there's only 2 bases of operation to avoid, one in the direct center and one to the very north. Avoid those and the rest of the zone is pretty much free. 4 out of 10 difficulty, back to more reasonable exploring patterns for our elf motorcyclist. After around 3 hours and 30 minutes, or 17 minutes, we move on to Stone Talon Mountains. You know, despite feeling like one of those no strategic spot zones, Stone Talon is probably one of the most interesting zones to quest in the classic game. But its exploration also doesn't disappoint either if you want to try to be dumb like this elf. Every spot here feels packed with mobs, with all 3 Horde versus Alliance locations having some sense of danger to just rushing through them without a proper route. Roads aren't safe because, well, there could be one or the other patrolling them, or there could be just straight barricades on them, and chokehold points provide dangerous passage for anyone trying to get through a spot not riddled with conflicts. It's a well done, contested zone, and it has tight spots for first time players not prepared for the expedition. And as such, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. Not because it's annoying like Ajara, but it's actually difficult in some ways to try to get the actual exploration and pull off some of the maneuvers you're going to need. The mountains are finished in 3 hours and 52 minutes or 22 minutes as we move on to Desolace. Now, if Stone Talon is a contested zone done right, Desolace is just a blank slate of zones done horribly. Even the revamped version of this really couldn't save the zone from being interesting outside of the Burning Blade presence, and unfortunately we're back to some more of the boring exploration. You might think that based on what I've shown up to this point that the expedition has been a blast, and while that is true to some extent, it's a zone like this that has you doing, well, this the whole time. As there isn't much to show here, especially since it's closer to a neutral than contested zone, the difficulty here is 3 out of 10 because there's a swimming island to get to and one spot that has just a bit too many demons in it. Other than that, it's mostly free. We finished Desolace at 4 hours and 13 minutes, or 21 minutes after Stone Talon. Fearless's layout is important to Classic WoW as it provides a staple for the game for players in dire maw, but here it's just kind of an interesting zone with some rock surfaces and cliffs for potential danger. I'll classify it as a contested zone because it is fairly contested with more factions than anything neutral, but I'd forgive you for believing that it wasn't really a zone riddled with any conflicts. The biggest hurdle here is making your way through certain spots as you're required to do some swimming, go into caves, and travel up some land formations that are slightly more out of the way than anything else. As such, I'll give Fearless a 5 out of 10 in difficulty because of this, and the fact that there is also level 15 mods that give a similar problem to Winter Spring earlier. But the truth is, besides trying to figure out how to get to Camp Mojave close enough as an Alliance player, you're not going to have too much of a hard time roaming here. At about 4 hours and 44 minutes, or 31 minutes after Desolace, we wrap up Fearless and plan for our next move. Now, some of you might be thinking Thousand Needles is next, but I actually saved a Hearthstone back in Stone Talon so I could cut through the Southern Barrens and head to Mulgore to get it out of the way. These grassy plains will be the devil of me, as Thunderbluff will surely provide a difficult challenge for this lowly Night Elf mod. And if you just stand right here on this part of the plateau, you can get Thunderbluff. Yay! Man, the Horde cities are fairly simple to explore, but they were done all the same, and the hardest part of this was finding the nooks and crannies to mark on the map, as well as avoiding the cities while staying on the outskirts. So basically Durotar, but easier. Despite it once again being a Horde exclusive, I'll still give it a 5 out of 10 because it's basically on par with Durotar, but that's mostly more travel time than anything else. After 5 hours and 9 minutes, or 25 minutes after Fearless, we finish up the second capital Horde spot and head back to Southern Barrens. Similar to Stone Talon, most spots in the Southern Barrens here are contested with battles between the two factions, and as such, things are slightly more difficult to wander through. Unlike Stone Talon, however, the soldier count seems much smaller, even though the layout displays more of a war-torn landmass. As such, so long as you watch for the occasional patrols and stay around the outskirts of the opposite faction cities, there isn't much to find around here. Well, except for Northwatch Hold, which I totally forgot existed, and had to travel all the way from the 1,000 meters elevator to the out-of-the-way town. With essentially being Stone Talon Light, I'll give Southern Barrens a 6 out of 10 because it feels a little lengthy, but is balanced by the lack of combat that the mountain counterpart had. Certainly some rough spots, but mostly middle-of-the-road difficulty. The Southern Barrens time is about 5 hours and 25 minutes, or 14 minutes after completing Mulgore. Now, surely you're all thinking 1,000 meters must be next, right? Nope. We've still got the home of the Daughter of Deathwing, Dustwallow Marsh. And outside the occasional swim, this one isn't too much difficult either. It's more contested than a neutral zone, the conflicts here are minimal and avoidable, and we're far from the riddle of strife that plagues the footholds in the Barrens and Stone Talon Mountains. As such, you can pretty much move freely around the Crescent, and since there's no central city like Azshara in the direct middle of it, you're able to dance your way to Mudsprocket to finish off the zone. This zone felt similar to Fairless in terms of difficulty, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a 5 out of 10 as such because the layout is a little inconvenient, but nothing more. Dustwallow is finished at around 5 hours and 40 minutes in, or 15 minutes after the completion of Southern Barrens. And now, Thousand Needles. Without doing the opening quest, you're kinda stuck swimming around everywhere. Now, if you have a water mount, then this isn't as bad, but some places require you to go up on ledges only to jump down so you can get to certain spots atop of plateaus. Plus, entering here isn't really convenient in any way, shape, or form. Sure, Fairless probably has one of the best ways in, but even from there, the swimming can be outright slow and unbearable at times. I found myself hugging the wall and mounting as much as possible while doing it to get the best results, but it still took me some time. However, is it really that hard to explore? Well, while it's certainly slow and time-consuming, the difficulty itself is mild. Probably because once you actually reach the destination, the number of encounters you must deal with is minimal to non-existent. Combined with that, the location of being more neutral than contested, and I could really only give it a 5 out of 10 in good conscience, even though I wanted to give it a harder rating. Speaking of time, the zone takes me up to 6 hours and 13 minutes, or roughly 33 minutes to complete. Tanaris. The land of the bandit and the home of the bandit. The biggest difficulty here is how vast Tanaris looks on the map. Sure, it may not be lengthy, but the expanse is sizable and some of the zones aren't a cakewalk to completely get to. I also found myself disconnecting here several times due to faulty water mechanics while swimming in one zone. Outside of that, however, there isn't much to address. Nothing really comes as a difficult spot for this neutral zone, or at least nothing we haven't already encountered, and as such, again, it's another middle of the road, 5 out of 10 in difficulty. Because of its vastness, however, it takes me up to the 6 hour and 41 minute mark, or roughly 28 minutes to finish. Now, Ungoro, on the other hand, provided a challenge that is the ability to not fall asleep while traveling in circles. Yes, it's always that fun, isn't it? Other than one missing part of the circle here, the rest of the zone provided no challenge or anything to note. As a neutral zone, it's just a matter of dancing around mobs and going up hillsides. Ungoro gets a 5 out of 10 in difficulty because of 1 or 2 hidden spots, but besides that, there's nothing here. We finished out the expedition of the crater at 6 hours and 59 minutes, or 18 minutes after the completion of Tanaris. Finally, the underdeveloped, under-influenced, and underwhelming zone of Silithus. Similar to other circular zones, most of the exploration comes from going around the outskirts and then moving to the center to get one safe haven on the map. Being a neutral zone, there isn't really much to go over. The Twilight camps might pose a problem if you run into them directly, but as you can simply roam around the outskirts to get the marks, you won't find much here either. I almost want to give this one a 4 out of 10 in difficulty just because it's limited how much you actually have to go and explore, so I'm going to do just that. Deal with it. Silithus is finished at 7 hours and 12 minutes, or 11 minutes. Now some of you are thinking, and while yes, they are on Kalimdor, they're considered part of the Cataclysm zones, so they'll be covered when I go over the Cata zones coverage, because if I don't split it up, then Deep Home will be on its own video, and I mean, come on, it's Deep Home. Who wants to watch one video about that? So in summary, the total time for Kalimdor is about 7 hours and 12 minutes to complete. The least interesting zone by far was Moonglade, and the most interesting zone was Stone Talon Mountains. The most time-consuming was Azshara due to its strange layout. And finally, if you were able to see how many levels I get into this video, comment down below to see if your guess was correct. And if you like silly challenges like this one, look for a box that will lead you to other stupid stuff I've done on the screen.